It is Wednesday, September 4th at 6 p.m. This is the Historic and Architectural Review Board meeting, and it is now adjourned, calling to order. Apologies. Our first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we have four different applications to look at tonight. The first is HARB 2019-10, which is 212 Bloomingdale Avenue, Lot 3. Do you want to do Lot 3 first? Is that okay? Amend the previous HARB application and construct a new single-family home. Would it be worth it to present all at once, or you want to go through each one?
At least to kind of go through them quickly, and then we can come back, maybe detail.
That might be good. Like, give us a general and then get specific on each. Thank you.
Before we start, I'd like to ask one question. As I went through your plans, these properties were subjected to litigation. Could you just give a brief overview of that litigation
and being an architect, that's above my
and its conclusion?
Yep.
Sure. Greg Lingo, I'm the owner of the properties. I purchased the properties approximately 6 or 7 years ago. Prior to purchasing it, I understood that there was another home builder, Norsini Builders, that was in a lawsuit from the neighbors, sued the builder and the township for an approval that the prior builder received. It was, I believe, for 5 total new lots, tearing down 2 of the houses and 5 new homes. I kind of came onto the scene and negotiated with the township and the neighbors. I am a neighbor. I live about 6 doors away from this property. And I negotiated with the neighbors to reduce the number of new homes that were going to be built, as well as protecting one of the buildings that was there for a long period of time, and agreed to not do anything with lot, which was 212 Bloomingdale Avenue, for a period of 5 years. So I had kind of a period of time before I was allowed to do any development, which is this 3-lot subdivision that we're talking about.
Thank you for that.
Okay. So let me just bring you up to date a little bit. And we've submitted, some of the things have just been resubmitted as they had been prior, but then we did update particularly the neighborhood context map, and I apologize for last time, the confusion. We didn't have a photo of the house that's being removed, and there were some things mislabeled. So this is an updated context map. As I mentioned last time, it's, I won't say it's an odd street in Wayne, but it's certainly not North and South Wayne railroad houses. It's a mixed bag of a melange of different styles of architecture built over a long period. So there are houses on the street that go back to the end of the 19th century all the way through the 1980s in a variety of styles and also different time periods. So if the house that's actually coming down is 212, as we had mentioned last time. That has been developed into apartments, I don't know how long, but over a longer period of time. And even though it's an older home, it's been chopped up and fire escapes added and this, that, and the other. And that's shown on the context plan now. Across the street, there's several collection of garden apartments and those sweet little Spanish colonial apartments right there at 223. And they are different in character than the houses, for the most part, on the north side of the street, which, again, are kind of a variety of late Victorian for the most part. And so the other thing we put on here, you had asked last time, because it was hard for you to gauge kind of the massing of our proposed houses vis-a-vis the houses that are existing on the street. So we added, to the best of our knowledge, we couldn't go knock on everybody's door and measure every house. Like, can I climb up on your roof? But using photographic data, we've tried to put the heights of each of the houses on. And they range from, the houses range, most of them are in the kind of the 35-foot range. 200 West Avenue, which is up the hill on the corner of Bloomingdale and West, which is that sort of second empire mansard roof structure, which was added on to a couple of years back, is the tallest of those, and it's about 40 feet. All of our houses would conform to the zoning regs for the height limitation, which is 35 feet. So just keep those dimensions in mind, and when I go through our plans, we've also added the heights to the peak in some cases as well. So are there any questions on this before I go on to the actual lots?
I can just bring up some information about 212 Bloomingdale Avenue. As far as the Radnor Historical Society's records go, there's zero information on the house.
Interesting.
Radnor Township records say it's a contributing property, and it was built by 1909. Property records for Delaware County say it was built in 1920. Its style, old. So just some background on the house that remains on this lot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think this was an overall site plan that was submitted. I'm going to show you the site plans individually for the different lots, but you guys had asked about, because again, it was hard last time, and I really, again, apologize, to see the disposition of the 3 proposed houses next to the house that's remaining. So there's a common driveway coming in on the south side. Lot 1 has a garage entrance on the side. That's the longer rectangular house. And then there's a little bit of a common drive in the back, and 2 left-hand garages on the 2 rear property houses. The other thing I'd mentioned last time is we consciously did not want to build 3 sort of, I'll call them cookie cutter houses, even good cookie cutters, because we wanted it really to appear, the interest of the street is, you know, that it does have a variety of architectural styles and built over a series of periods, and not that these houses in any way are going to fool anybody into thinking, oh, they were built in 1912 and 1918 and 1927. They're going to be built at the same time, but the idea was that each house would have its own individual style and styles that would be appropriate to that particular part of Wayne, and so we consciously chose 3 disparate styles. The front house I would call sort of a colonial revival / Pennsylvania farmhouse. That might be stretching it a little bit. The Lot 3 house is kind of an arts and crafts, hearkening back to a period around 1915 in the U.S. And then the Lot 4 house is, again, sort of a second empire, late Victorian with the mansard roof. Then we were taking some of the cues off the structures that were on the street. And so that was the one site plan. Do you want me to skip over to 3 as I go through them? Or does it matter if I just... Okay, got it. Okay. Okay, so Lot 3 is one of those 2 houses, I should say, even though we're designing each of the houses in different sort of dress, if you will. They do share a plan, Lot 3 and Lot 4, in the sense that they're fairly square and vertical. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. But Lot 3 is the house that I mentioned is meant to be in a sort of a arts and crafts style. Again, the driveway, the common driveway, comes across the front of the house. The garage is a 2-car garage on the left-hand side of the facade. And this is the front facade of the house, which if you had gone back and looked at the 2014 drawings, which I don't know if you guys even had, I think last time you said maybe you didn't, but one of the reasons we came back in was Greg wanted to update some of the materials, but it's a combination of a shingle on the facades as well as a clapboard. I mean, in the old days they would have been stained wood. Today they're going to be stained or pre-painted fiber cement siding and or fiber cement shingles. Hardy Plank is the sort of proprietary name that's most well known. It's a material that is green material. It holds its color very, very well, and it's very compatible in neighborhoods that have a mix of the old and new. So you're seeing the combination of those things. On the left-hand side, you'll see the garage doors, which are under a small overhanging roof. These drawings don't have shadows on them, but if you were to see this facade maybe at noon on June 21st when the sun's up at 82 degrees, that the garage doors and the front porch would actually be in shadow. So we wanted, even though the garages are not recessed in the main facade, that overhang is meant to be to soften them up a little bit. And it has some brackets, which again in the old days would have been wood. Today they're going to be formed out of a synthetic recycled plastic material, but they will be custom made to look like wood. And those are those 3 pairs of brackets you see. And then above that, the darker color there with the lines in it is a standing seam roof, which would be a pre-finished aluminum meant to harken back to some of the standing seam roofs you would have seen on township houses or in this area a long time ago. Yes, absolutely. It's set back a little bit further. On the site plan, well, maybe it's on our plan. No, we don't submit the plans to you, of course. So if you go back to the Lot 3 site plan, see how the where the porch is in the kind of shaded area? No, that project, just for information's sake, that's projecting about 6 feet from the orange, which is the main wall. So that's projecting about 6 feet. The overhang over the garage is probably more like 2.5 to 3 feet. You can kind of see it on the side elevation. No, I'll show you on the side elevation when I get to it. Do you see on my drawings here? I'm sorry. Okay. So see the side elevation on the lower right. So beyond is where the columns are. That's the projecting front porch, which, as I said, was projecting about 6 feet. The overhang over the garage is about 4 feet. That's that little triangular piece. Does that make sense to you? Because we didn't want, even though we wanted to soften the garages and make them attractive, we didn't want to overshadow the front entrance, because obviously that's the more important architectural piece. And so to answer your question, that's kind of what's happening there. So back to the front, there's 2 pairs of square columns, again in sort of an arts and crafts style, a high 2-light door, which is very reminiscent of that style, which is colored the same as the garage doors, flanked by 2, I'll call them kind of alcove windows that are peeking out from behind those columns. And then a series of, what we, again, wanted to do was to not wallpaper the entire house with a singular material, but rather to have a series of materials and a series of colors and forms that would soften and make the facade more interesting. It's very much not a symmetrical facade, which is in that style of architecture. Ms. Snyder, you asked last time about the little corners that were cut off the main roof. And that's, I didn't just explain it very well last time, but again, that's a gable that's running away from me. And those little 45s that are cut off the roof, you could call them, it's kind of a marriage of a gable roof and a hip roof, or what's called a clipped gable. And though I don't have houses from the township on this particular page, these are 2 arts and crafts houses on the left-hand side. That's the look that we were trying to achieve. And the reason we did it was to kind of bring the scale of that roof down a little bit, and again, just add a little more visual interest. So that's what that was. And then if I go to the, and by the way, on those, that arts and crafts house on the lower left there, we have similar square pilasters above stone piers on our porch. Ours are not quite so truncated. See the way those go in, but that's very much in the style as to have the square pilaster, not pilasters, are actually columns, square columns as opposed to round, and so that's what we were trying to achieve there. And then when you see the other elevations of the sides, primarily clapboard with a brick base, and then a variety of window styles and types. Again, the windows would be along the order of a Pella architectural series or a Pella Pro line with what's called a simulated divided light. They're not individual panes of glass as would have been done 100 years ago, but they do have a projected mutton on the outside of the glass that does appear to be like a traditional window. And each of those windows has different light patterns depending on whether it's a large window that might be in the downstairs rooms or an upstairs bedroom window, bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. The shingles I mentioned last time would be along the lines of a staggered 40-year fiberglass shingle. GAF Timberline is probably the one that's best known. And the overall palette is meant to be kind of a warm, kind of a dark beige taupe palette, and then with this yellow trim, more of a cream trim, it wouldn't be a bright yellow, that we've showing on the elevations.
So the color you're showing us, sort of jelly mustard color, that's the color you plan to make them?
Yes.
Did you say what the material at the bottom of the house was going to be? I might have missed that.
Brick. Yeah. Notice it's not a red brick, though, because, again, we're trying to develop a palette that, so it would be like a brownish brick.
So this is an interesting situation in that we have 3 buildings being built at the same time, or around the same time, and they go deep into the property. So what we're looking for is to understand the style of the neighborhood and keeping it similar, which I know you understand. But there's another element of we're only concerned with what you can see from public right-of-ways.
Right.
So for this house in particular, I don't know that we're going to see a lot of it, but can you help us understand the pieces that we will see, which
Okay.
might be the front left corner and the front or the right side? I'm not completely sure. So if you could clarify
Right.
that, that would be helpful.
No, that's a very good point. So, again, if I'm, and I don't have a three-dimensional drawing, but obviously Lot 1 is the longer house in the front. That facade, which we consider the main facade, is actually in the, facing the rear of the Lot 1 house. So you're never going to see the main facade of the house head-on as it's shown in an elevation. And an elevation is a projected architectural drawing. You never see elevations that way anyway. So what you're going to be seeing obliquely if I'm driving south on Bloomingdale Avenue is the side elevation with the chimney, which is this one here. Does that make sense? Because I'm going to be seeing that obliquely. I'll catch the porch when I'm looking obliquely at the corner of the house. And then if I was, say, driving north on Bloomingdale, and again, I'm assuming there's going to be plantings and so forth eventually, you would see the opposite facade, which is this other side elevation. But even that you're going to see less of because the house next door is going to be blocking kind of that until there's a window on my left, and most people driving are not going to then look through that little slot between the two houses. But that's the primary pieces that you're going to see. Driving's not your main concern. If I'm walking as a pedestrian, it's going to be a similar sort of a look.
Can you tell me why there are so few windows? Natural light doesn't seem to be
I would argue, well, it really depends on the function that's behind those spaces. This is a little deceiving. Those windows are actually rather large. If you look at the front elevation, so for instance, that's a 7-foot door, okay? If I look at the side windows, all of those upstairs windows are 3 feet high by 2 feet or whatever. Bedroom windows, we're not going to bring the sills down quite low because they're simply going to have shades on them anyways if they're a private space. The downstairs windows, I think those 2 in the back are, Greg, I don't even remember. They're in the dining space or the living space. I'm sorry? Yeah. Oh, no, they're large, but the downstairs windows are going to be a bit larger. The 2 large ones I'm pointing out there are probably on the order of 5.5 feet high by the combination of them 5 feet wide. So they are fairly large. No, I understand, and I will just say, look, we're moving, we will be, hopefully, moving ahead with the final design. And once we get into to the details, it's obviously very important for Greg and his team to have spaces that are obviously, as you say, bring daylight in, that are very attractive and so forth. And so if any of those things need revisiting, that would be revisited at the time. We certainly don't want dark spaces with, kind of mean window openings.
Just an observation that I have, that I've seen new construction in the area.
Yeah.
And this is kind of similar, but on a smaller scale as far as number of houses. Like there's one development in Bryn Mawr around the hospital that's relatively new.
Right.
And they're like very large row houses in
Right.
a way. They have
Twins,
porches
yeah,
and things.
yeah.
And I was just curious because I can see where a number of them front old Lancaster Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
But in the back, there's also houses that don't have any street view
Right.
like this. So I'm just curious, did you at one time think of citing the entrances on the two back houses on Owens Lane? No? I know it's small, but I was just curious about that. Because it seems like the houses in back, like these houses in Bryn Mawr with this new development, are kind of like obscured in a way. Unless, again, the homeowner might want that, but it just seems to me to be isolating in a way. When I walked through that development in Bryn Mawr, and I
Right.
just felt a similar situation here, but maybe someone would like that too. That could be a question. So with Owens Lane, no entrance, it was a question of what, space?
Again, kind of coming into the project later, this already was, there was already a restriction for, an agreed upon restriction that the houses would go out to Bloomingdale. But I'm not privy to kind of the reasons for that. This Owens Lane is, this is kind of a, right here, it's a driveway in a sense. It's a,
Way light, but if you go down there, then you hit the
eventually
street.
you would hit the street,
Yeah.
Owens Lane, correct. Yeah, it's an unpaved alley behind the houses here.
So I feel like I'm a little bit concerned just about the right-hand side of this house and what you're going to see, which might not be a lot. I'm not clear on, because your site plan, it's up to the edge of the property, and there's not a lot of vegetation on your site plan.
Mm-hmm.
So the neighboring property, though, appears to have a lot of vegetation on it, such that you wouldn't really see the side of the house. Is that true?
When you say the right-hand side, you mean the fireplace side?
When you're looking at the house,
As you're looking, stage right.
it would be the south side. How much of that do you think you'll see from the road?
Well, can you zoom in on that possibly? Well, there's a house between.
Terrace there, and then there's like these small row houses that are back there. It's actually kind of really neat in a way. Walk down it, so and I was trying to gauge as I was walking down Owens Lane, what am I going to see from Owens Lane?
So the Owens Lane that you're referring to, there's a one-way Owens Lane that loops kind of down here. There is a unpaved driveway that loops back around here. So this is a dirt road, essentially. There is a house here that was landscaped over within the last 5 years, heavily landscaped along here, and they have a very large non-conforming garage here. I don't think there's going to be a lot of view shed here for this particular house that we're talking about.
I would agree.
So then, thank you, that answered my question. But I have another question. If Owens Lane is a public right-of-way, then are we viewing this project from that point of view as well? I wasn't thinking about that originally.
The main view, obviously, is Bloomingdale Avenue. And again, you just have to go there and walk it, Owens Lane, because it's just really kind of unique in a way. It probably was from, pre-zoning days when South Wayne was originally built, and you get that feel when you go back there. And as Greg said, there is a gravel road, which leads to what I think was an old carriage house, which was renovated, and I know at one time it was rented. But the only way you can really go and see that is if you walk it. I believe you can drive down it from Bloomingdale. Am I correct? It's a one-way street on Owens? Okay.
I believe Owens is a public to a point. And then I think the section that comes down that you're referencing may be private. But Mary Ann's going to get a map. We're going to check that.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I don't have any other
Also,
questions.
just one other thing while I talk. If there's any need for the 2014 file, we have it here. Okay.
I don't have any other questions about this except for whether or not we should be viewing it from Owens Lane or not as well. So if anyone else has questions on this, I'd say while we're waiting for an answer on that, we can move to the next one. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Does that work
Okay.
for
Do you
you
want
as
to go
well?
lot 4 or lot 1?
Let's do lot 4 while we're back in that
Okay.
area.
Okay, so lot 4, obviously, next to lot 3, and this is the one that I had characterized as being designed in a sort of a Second Empire, late Victorian style. Same, more or less the same footprint, with a garage on the left-hand side, a porch, an entry porch on the right-hand side. So if I look at that house, it's approximately 33 and a half feet to I'd say the peak of the mansard. Mansards don't really have peaks. They have flat portions at the top of the mansard roof. And again, carriage house doors on the left-hand side, a different style porch and a different style door, et cetera. In fact, an overall different expression. So in this case, we were looking at the house up at 200 West Avenue, and there's one that's across West, not the one on the northwest corner of West in Bloomingdale, but the one that's next door to that one. And so for some of our inspiration, this house would be, for the most part, hardy clapboard siding, and it's a cream color siding, and the trim in this case would be white. So it's a very different color and different sort of expression than lot 4. The mansard roof, again, would be a staggered shingle, but in this case, kind of a colder, cool gray. The windows in this case would be a 2/1 light pattern for the most part, which is a double-hung window with double lights above a single pane. Shutters on the larger windows, no shutters on the smaller windows. Again, there's a standing seam roof, in this case over the porch roof, which is kind of a shed. The base in this case is stone and not brick, and then we've kind of inverted it such that the chimney is brick instead of stone. So again, we're trying to mix things up so that, and we're not doing this kind of willy-nilly. We've thought about it, and we want to, again, I don't think you're going to be fooling anybody that these houses were built in that period that we already talked about, but that there would be a variety of architectural expressions and styles and colors and materials, and we think that the overall effect hopefully would be fairly good. And then the two side elevations, again, larger windows downstairs in the back, smaller windows upstairs. There's a pretty heavily dentiled cornice, or maybe it's a corbelled cornice, which are those big brackets across the front and the side. And when you were asking earlier, Ms. Snyder, about how you would see the Lot 3 house, in this case, the Lot 4 house, in some ways it's similar, but just a different kettle of fish. So first of all, both of these houses, I was just looking at it when you all were discussing the Owens Lane piece. Both of these houses, the front facade is about 150 feet from the center line of Bloomingdale Avenue, okay, if you just add up the dimensions. Obviously, the house that we already talked about is sitting behind Lot 1. This one is sitting at the end of the driveway, but again, if I'm driving north on Bloomingdale Avenue, I will not see it until I pass the house to its south, and then there'll be a window of view shed, if you will, between that and before I get to the Lot 1 house. If I'm coming south on Bloomingdale Avenue, for all intents and purposes, you're not going to see the house at all. Because, again, the house next door on the north side that Greg pointed out, and the fact that the Lot 1 house is going to be blocking it. So you will be seeing primarily the front facade, and kind of back to your point about the Bryn Mawr houses, Mr. Modetsko. This is one that even though it's set back from the road and the front is kind of the back of Lot 1, you will see this facade because the driveway will come up to it, more so than you would have seen on the Lot 3 house. And so we did want that very much to be the front and to engage the streetscape, if you will, albeit it's a bit set back. And so that's essentially the Lot 4 house. And I'm happy to take questions.
We have an answer?
What we can tell on the map, Owens is public there. So if I have my directions correct, the north side of lots 3 and 4 would be visible from a public road. And we're doing some more research. If we find something different, we'll tell you. But again,
Are you talking about the portion of Owens Lane to the north or behind the houses? I'm sorry.
well, it essentially would be the back.
The dirt road, you're saying is public?
No, I'm talking about, if you want to look at this here. This is Owens coming out.
Would you actually mind bringing that up for everybody to see?
West Wing,
Where's the
Oh, same one.
Owens goes down this way.
Well, he's talking about the part of Owens Lane to the north, not the part behind, is what he's saying is public right of way.
Okay, so after consulting with township authorities, the Owens Lane that is depicted on the site plan map that runs behind lots 3 and 4 is not public. So we do not have to worry about what the back of the homes or the back of those properties look like. Okay?
Here, this is non-public, that's public.
So we were talking about lot 4. Do we have any questions or comments about lot 4?
My comment for lot 4 is the same as my comment for lot 3. Is that there seems to be a parsimonious application of windows to the sides of the house. And if this is the final design that you wish us to approve, I cannot disapprove it, but I do give you my comment that this looks like each room gets one small window.
No.
And, well, I mean, there's 3
No,
windows.
each room has
alo-
multiple windows.
There's 3 windows along the side elevation that you give us. And it just seems to me that the use of windows has been very restricted. That's just my comment.
I understand.
No, let's do 3 and 4.
Do you want to finish these up first? Does anyone want to make a recommendation for lot 4?
Can we do this all as one group? No, it has to be individually?
It was
It's
submitted
3
in-
different applications, so.
Okay.
Yeah, we went through 3 and we went through 4. So since we just stopped
And
talking
is there any
about
other further comment on
4.
3 and 4?
That's what, but yeah. So we just finished talking about 4, so I figured we'll decide on 4, and then we'll jump back to 3, and then we'll let them present number 1. Does that work? So any other comments on lot 4?
I motion to recommend the certificate of appropriateness. Do I have a second? This is for lot 4.
I'll second it. All those in favor, say aye.
No, I'm not in favor. I think I'm sorry. We are charged with trying to maintain the architectural character of the neighborhood, and these are such dramatic mashups of styles.
So,
I'm going to abstain instead of voting no, because you are by right entitled to build, but we are charged with commenting.
understand.
So I abstain.
So let's take the vote again. Now we have 3 people voting. All those in favor? So we have 2 in favor. So we have majority vote. So you're good with lot 4. We recommend the certificate of appropriateness for lot 4.
All right, thank you.
So let's take a step back to lot 3. Are there any questions or comments on lot 3?
Are there any more comments?
No.
No? Okay. I motion to recommend a certificate of appropriateness. Do I have a second? This is for lot 3.
It can't be seen from the street. I'll second it.
All those in favor? All are in favor for recommending the certificate of appropriateness for lot, what is it, 3? For lot 3. All right, so let's talk about lot 1 now.
I think this is going to be pretty extensive here, so also please bear with us on the Lot 1, because there's a lot going on there.
I understand.
And it has site influence, being right there on Bloomingdale Avenue.
Yep.
And plus that older house is there too. The older house is still there, the
Okay.
original structure.
Okay, so the footprint of Lot 1, as we mentioned before, is different than the other two. It's more of a linear disposition on the site. There is a two-car garage on the left-hand side. We did want the entrance for the garage to not be on the main facade, so we brought it in around the corner so that we could put windows on the garage elevation. Here's my Post-it note. As I mentioned last time, and again today, the style is, I would say, characterize it more as colonial revival, kind of a Pennsylvania-ish farmhouse. And I don't mean literally, but the kind of thing that was very popular on the main line, I would say from about 1920 to pre-war, 1940s. There were a lot of architects designing in that style, and you can see those types of houses all over north side Bryn Mawr, north side Haverford, in the Township. I used to live many years on St. David's Avenue. We had several Wallace and Warner houses on St. David's Avenue. Glen Mary, Canterbury has some, and then they're even sprinkled around places like Brookside, et cetera. But they were mostly infill houses. They were certainly not built in the 19th century. The house itself is meant to be, when I say sort of colonial revival, it is not meant to be, and Mr. Modesto, you mentioned symmetry last time, and I do want to address your comments from last time. It's not meant to be a center hall Georgian, a la something you'd see in Williamsburg circa 1787, or real Georgian, 1704 in Britain. It's meant to be kind of a more of an informal disposition of the facade that maybe looks a little bit like it had been developed over time. And that was a style of house that was, as I say, very popular from the 20s to the pre-46 or whatever, as practiced by people like Walter Durham and Richardson, Brognard Oakey, Wallace and Warner, even Horace Trombauer did some houses like that, et cetera. And so it's kind of a combination of stone, clapboard, stone base. The windows, in many cases, they're not traditional 6/6 in this case, but 4/1. Even the windows, some have shutters, some don't have shutters, some have window boxes, some do not. Some have transoms above them, some do not. It has a little bit of a classical portico on the front here. Again, it has a blue door like the other ones. In this case, it's more of a raised panel, style and rail type door. A little bit of a fan light in the upper gable. The overall facade is 33.5 feet high. And it intentionally does not have, as I mentioned before, symmetry across the entire facade. So the garage on the left-hand side is clapboard. There are garage windows downstairs. There's a shed dormer upstairs and what's a larger bedroom. The centerpiece is stone, which is meant to be the most important piece of the facade. And then the right-hand side is again clapboard, but with a little bit of a bigger stone base with some grouped windows in one of the downstairs living spaces. And then just to point out, these on the right-hand side, this is on the same page as the clipped gables. These are a couple of houses by Oakey, who, for my money, was one of the best guys doing this back in the day. Neither of these are in Radnor. The one on the top, I think, is, it may actually be in Wynwood. The one on the bottom, I know for a fact, is on Goshen Road in Tredyffrin. And I only point this out because, Mr. Modesto, you had made the comment last time about aligning the downstairs doors and the windows and so forth. And look, I've done many, many houses where we do that. But if you look at the house on the bottom in particular, what he's trying to do is to almost make it look, because back in 1780s, when a real Pennsylvania farmhouse would have been built in stone in Chester County, there would have been no architect. There would have been a master mason and a master carpenter. And there would have been little eccentricities of non-symmetry and different sizes of windows, et cetera. And so what these very highfalutin architects did earlier in the century, and they were the creme de la creme of mainline architects, was to kind of replicate that in a more informal way, albeit for modern day living. And so that was the kind of thing we were trying to achieve. So if you look at that front door there, it doesn't align with the window above it. If you look at the window to the left of the front door, it does not align with the windows that are upstairs. So each part of the house has different expressions, whether it's a living space, a porch, a bedroom, or combination of bedrooms, et cetera. And that was the look that we were trying to achieve, not copying any of these houses per se. Yes.
I have a comment
Sure.
on that. I looked at the pictures that you've presented of the other houses on Bloomingdale, and I know there are a wide variety of styles and time periods. But the one pattern that sticks out, and these are, just my opinion from the pictures that you have submitted for your design plan, was that the vast majority of those properties, when you look at them, their windows and their doors are symmetrical.
Well, when you say symmetrical, you mean they're aligned top to bottom, I guess? Because none of these facades is symmetrical. Each one of these is a Victorian house with kind of disparate gables and different...
One on top of the other or centered, like a window centered above a door, for example. That's what I mean by symmetry.
Okay.
You look, pretty much I think the vast majority of them hold to that, even with the newer construction. See the windows, they line up or they're centered
Yeah.
above each other. That's what I look at when I think of symmetry.
If you look at 220 Bloomingdale, for example, there's windows under the porch that bear absolutely no relation to the window in the gable.
All right.
There's no window below that in the gable. If you looked at 50 railroad houses on North or South Wayne, they almost exclusively have that sort of pattern. Now, I'm not saying we're designing a Victorian house. We're not. As I already said, it's a colonial revival house. But for this particular style of house, because the garage on the left-hand side is meant to be subservient and not as important as the center portion of the facade, we didn't feel it was appropriate to just, again, I keep coming back to Georgian, but if you look at, name your Georgian house, and I mean real Georgian, if you go back to England in the early part of the 18th century, it is one facade of 40 windows, and I mean like the big, the estates or whatever, and they do absolutely line up left and right, up and down, et cetera. And there are many houses in America that do that as well, but this particular style that we were looking to as kind of our muse, if you will, was not that. And I just think that, personally, and having taught architectural history at several universities, it's a more interesting look. And I think if you ask the common person, what about this house? Let's just say if we were to align all those windows and I was to ask 5 people on the street, what about this house is similar to the houses that they're out in the context of the neighborhood? I personally don't believe anybody would say that the windows all line up. That's my opinion. Because there's so many other things going on in terms of gables, recessed planes, high roofs, low roofs, shed roofs. The dormer on the house that's coming down, has a wide collection of 4 windows that bear no relation to the tall window that's under the gable on the left-hand side.
Well, my whole take was just that, when I looked at these pictures, I just got the sense that the pattern was, all else being equal, that there's a lot of symmetry going on here. And in my opinion, when I look at architecture, and this is not an original thought that I have in architecture, but others have pointed it out. I think of Witold Rybczynski's work, and I learned a lot from reading his books because it's basically architecture for the laity, and that really helped me in what I do here. And he has just some heuristics, and hopefully I'm attributing this right, but because it also could be another person, but he's a sociologist, is that all else being equal, symmetry is more pleasing to the human eye than asymmetry. All else just being equal. And I know that you gave an opinion that's
Right.
different from that. But I know for myself, in my own opinion, all else being equal, I would choose symmetry over asymmetry.
I'd like to chime in on the comment because I'm usually the one defending the asymmetry. I think I'm on, but my background is American art and architecture, and I will really take issue with your comment that in the 1780s the windows were put wherever. There were periods in American history. 1780s was certainly not one of them in which symmetry was extremely important and didn't start to fall apart until the beginning of, well, the first houses built that became Victorian were more 1850s. And some of the worst houses that we have that purported to imitate reproduction classical architecture were done in the 1950s, just the way this looks with windows that aren't symmetrical. And yes, it would grate on me, it would grate on you, maybe. It's a design that is trying to imitate the past, but is serving the architect and builder by making the windows fit the function of the interior rather than the way it's going to look on the street. I drive by these houses all the time. Probably the most prevalent examples you'll see in King of Prussia area. We don't have as many here, but 1950s and 1960s produced a lot of this type of housing where the window is slapdash. It doesn't matter whether it fit over the front door. This should be over the front door. It's totally grating to me.
I will just say a couple of things. Number one, when I was talking about the 1780s and pointing out that Oakey in particular they were designing to vernacular houses. They were not patterning these 1940s houses after the Governor's Palace in Williamsburg or, the Morris House on 4th Street in Philadelphia. That's not what they were doing. So I agree with you there, but that's not the only type of house that was built in the 1780s. The classical Palladian, the whole 9 yards, okay, number one. Number two, we did not design them only from the inside out. If I made it sound like that, that's not what I want. I would not show you.
You didn't make it sound like that. I was the one that suggested that. It appears to me that this design has to have been done this way, or it would look a little more visually pleasing. The right and the left-hand side, I think, look fine because the first floor balances, even though the windows aren't lined up, it still balances. The grading part is that center section.
Okay. Just real quick, I'm going to show you. This is what we had in 2014 and what was approved. And I'm not saying in any stretch of the imagination that because this was approved, then you should approve. We were trying to improve upon this design. But it had even more disparate forms of windows, light patterns, asymmetries, et cetera. And we thought we were, I won't say reeling it in a little bit, but we thought that we were creating something that was what I would call a both and, not an either or. Something that is in that style that harkens back to the colonial revival, and yet it still has a little bit more interest in expression. A la, again, I mean, it's interesting because when you say, like a house, for example, if you ask any American, what does the facade of Mount Vernon look like, okay? And most people will tell you, if they remember what it looks like or saw a photograph of it, it's this kind of white thing with coin blocks were made out of wood and sand in the paint because we didn't have cut stone in those days. And then it has these two dependencies, one of which is the kitchen and one was another outbuilding combined and connected by a loggia. And then most people would tell you the center of Mount Vernon is completely symmetrical. If you have your phone, you can Google Mount Vernon main facade. If you look at that facade, the window patterns, the doors, everything on that facade shifts. And yet the overall composition, this is only my opinion, is pleasing to the eye because the architect, in the same way that the architects of the railroad houses were mixing a palette of roof forms, chimneys, dormers, window patterns, et cetera, so that the whole thing together somehow worked as a complete composition. And I like that, and we're not trying to do anything Victorian here. And I'm sorry.
You're not trying to do anything Victorian, now you get my comment. This is a contributing property. You are tearing down a contributing property.
Mhm.
You are not even remotely attempting to put something back that looks even similar.
No.
Now, why do you come before us so arrogantly and tell us that Revival Farmhouse is going to fit in a neighborhood that has primarily Victorian houses?
Because the township in any urban, suburban town, and Wayne is a gem, and it's not King of Prussia, we all
Well,
know
this is
that.
not going to contribute to the gem. This looks like it was airlifted directly from a western Montgomery County development. It is not in keeping with the visual character of the neighborhood, and I would like to therefore make a motion that we do not issue a certificate of appropriateness for property number 1.
I'll second.
I would like to continue debate.
So I would like to continue discussions as well, but that puts us in a deadlock, so are the two of you open to that? Do you want to vote?
I want to vote. I think that this house is not appropriate for the neighborhood. It's tall enough, but the houses behind it aren't really going to be seen. It looks like one of
Do you
those
want to
nondescript-
deny it, or do you want to grant a continuance?
2 minutes of the house that they did.
I think we could
in the
offer a
North Wayne
continuance.
Historic District, but it,
They have to come in with something a lot more thoughtful than Revival Farmhouse.
Could I take a closer look at the prior approved image of this house that you had put up there for a minute?
I just wanted to make one quick comment on that. When I saw the prior approval, in my opinion, that's a symmetrical design, in my opinion. I think what we're differing on is what we mean by symmetry. But when I saw that your former plan there that was approved initially, in my opinion, it was symmetrical in its design with the windows and the doors. Not entirely, but it gets pretty dang close.
Okay, but it had a very heavy-weighted arched portico on the right-hand side, very different than the left-hand expression. It had two different roof types. If we're talking about windows, yes, I agree with you.
I know this pattern seems to be a lot simpler, the one that you're presenting now, than as compared to what was initially
I
approved.
think that was the intention, was to tone it down a little bit.
Tone it down?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm assuming probably a question of maybe cost, things like that.
No, no.
Okay. Because what we're here for also, too, is like what is beneficial to the welfare of the homeowner, you know?
Understood.
And, you know, again, costs are one of those, in my opinion.
All right, thank you.
Question about it appears in the currently submitted version, there is a roof over the front door, but that's not on the side elevation plans from what I can tell. Is it overhanging or is it not?
Oh, you're right, I apologize, it's not. I'm sorry, no, that porch is inset, excuse me. So if you see Ms. Snyder, if you see the site plan,
Yeah.
so the actual white piece that's on the main facade, which I'll call it kind of a, it's a very severe low entablature, if you will, that probably only projects maybe 6 inches, and then the porch itself is inset. So those really are pilasters coming out from the stone.
Also, too, I'd just like to make a comment. I've already given some of the background of the history of this place. It's a newer house in general in some ways, the one that's existing there currently. My question to you, are you going to take any portion of the house that's there on 212 Bloomingdale Avenue and incorporate it into your proposed new design? Like, for example, will you keep any of the foundation?
No, it's in a different location.
Okay,
It wouldn't work with the way the properties are subdivided.
okay.
And if are there any architectural details, back to your point, Ms. Oakes, about the house that's coming down? We were not obviously trying to,
Certainly not, but every house in that neighborhood of a certain age has a porch. The house you're tearing down has a small porch. Other houses in the photographs that you provide have larger porches. But this has absolutely no connection to the outside of the house. There's no opportunity for people to sit on their porch and be neighborly or be seen or whatever. It is not, the style of this house is so dramatically different from everything else that's there. There have been other houses in historical districts that have been torn down against our wishes, but torn down nevertheless. But the houses that have been put back sort of borrowed a lot of architectural details from the surrounding character, and these are clearly new houses, but they sort of fit. They play nicely with their neighbors. This really looks so very nondescript to me. There is nothing at all that takes any cue from any of the other houses.
Well-
And it's very distressing to me that you wish to impose on the neighborhood something that is clearly going to not be part of the neighborhood. And you live there, sir. You live there. Part of why you love living there is because all the houses are so interesting. And this house is not interesting. It's so very plain, vanilla, common, looks like one of those big McMansion developments in Bluebell or in Worcester, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, where there wasn't a whole lot of thoughtfulness put into those houses. And I suspect that this house was designed with expedience in mind and not making something that the neighborhood would be pleased to look at.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I, as a professional who's been practicing for 40 years, that is not in any way, shape, or form the way it was designed. Back to the beginning, while there is a preponderance of Victorian houses on this street, there are many streets in the township. Again, when I lived on St. David's Avenue for 30 years, you go down the street, there's a Spanish colonial built by Wallace and Warner in the 1920s. It's across from two severely beautiful, that big giant yellow house on the corner of Shimoni and St. David's Ave, which is just the wildest late
That's a
Victorian.
beautiful house.
And then you go up the street, and it's a brick Georgian, and then you go down. Our house was a 1927 Tudor. Every house on that street, and for my money, a variety of, when there's not if I was doing this house on Walnut in North Wayne, I would not show you this house, because every house on that street is. I mean, should we have taken our cues from the Spanish colonial apartments? Should we have taken our cues from the 1980s fake mansard garden apartments? I mean, I honestly, for my money, it's a part of the township that has a variety of things. And you know, if Craig thinks that I did this expediently and was going to try to create something that was in Bluebell, I mean, I would be fired tomorrow, because that's not what we intend, and the quality of the house is going to be exceptional. And I think the design is good. I obviously am not convincing you of that. So I guess we'll just have to leave it.
Well,
at
here's
that.
another comment that I have. I think the important thing here to keep in mind is that it's right there on Bloomingdale Avenue. It has site influence because it can be seen, even with the vegetation that's out in front there. I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. Possibly the number one thing. So I do appreciate your argument on the various styles, and there's only certain things that we can do. I know there's only certain things that you can do. But I think the important thing is, you know, again, if there's going to be all these compromises, and there will be, I think the focus on symmetry would also be a major concern, even I think, in my opinion, above design.
So if it's all right, I would like to make a few comments. I think that your new design is an improvement upon the old, so I do appreciate that. I also see that the board, although years ago, did approve that design. So I do not want to dishonor the prior boards. However, I think that when I look at the neighborhood, and I don't know exactly the symmetry conversation that was going on. I mean, obviously I listened to it, but I don't have any comments on that. But what I see is when you look at this neighborhood, you see a lot of buildings with a lot of different pieces to the structure itself. And I might not be describing myself very well, but if you look at, for example, the original sketch plan, it has the next door neighbor's building, like just the outline of that,
I'm sorry,
of the
what are you
feature
looking
of the house.
Oh, the site plan.
The site plan, yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
And the house is all
Mhm.
crazy shape.
Right.
You have houses that are basically boxes here.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to make them fit into a neighborhood of homes that aren't boxes.
Right.
They're a compilation of a lot of different sized boxes. So I think you have I think you're trying, but I don't know that you're there yet in terms of keeping with that piece of the neighborhood. So I see that, and then I see the porch issue. I mean, Wayne is known for its porches. Porch Fest is next weekend. If this is truly just a door inset into the house, I don't know that that does represent what this street is about, or most streets in the historic parts of Wayne. So I think we've approved two, and I think we're trying to work with you guys here. I think this one is better than the original, and I think you're moving in a good direction. I just don't know that you're there yet, and I don't know that I can specifically say, oh, this window should be there and that should be here. You're also dealing with the fact that this is an attached garage, and that's a tough thing to do in Wayne and still look good. Now, I'm not going to argue that because that is clearly on the plans that is what they approved prior, but I appreciate that you're trying to make it look smaller. I mean, you're up.
Something
I
19th
appreciate
century
that you are
architects didn't
working.
have to deal with.
Exactly. So I appreciate what you're up against here. But I do think, and I think you're getting closer, but I don't know that we're there yet, especially from what I'm hearing from the other members on the board.
Okay.
So if there's no other comments.
I agree. And you taught architecture before, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you were saying. Have you ever read any of Witold Rybczynski's books?
Yeah, he was a Penn after I was a Penn.
Okay. Well, one of the arguments that Janelle was sharing, that the whole box look to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rybczynski had a similar thing with certain architecture, because in design you can design a shed as a shed, or a box as a box. And I think maybe that's a little bit appropriate here. So I'm more or less leaning towards offering a continuance to see if you could give further thought to your design plan after we've shared our various concerns and suggestions to you, and come on back. Is that okay? All right. Any more comment?
So I will amend my motion that we offer a continuance instead of not offering a certificate of appropriateness. So I hereby motion that we offer a continuance to the applicant until such time as they can come back with a design that is visually within the character of the neighborhood.
For
including porch.
lot one, and I second.
All those in favor? Looks like all are in favor.
Okay.
So we'll
Thank
see you
you.
again. Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you want to? Yeah. That was
Bill just got a contribution for free.
You know what, I think we're going to take a 5-minute recess, if that's all right with everyone. I'm sorry, we'll be with you very shortly, and we'll have a clear head for you.
We're not recreating much, so. I'll just talk loud. How's that? Okay. I'm Eric. Yes. Vince is the property owner. Vince Tagg. Yeah. Yeah. I work for the Taggs. I head up their property and facilities, and so. And I'm from Bluebell, so please don't hold that against me.
And my uncle builds homes in Bluebell.
Right.
So we're really batting 1,000.
But you live in Wayne, you don't live in Bluebell,
Yes, I do, ma'am.
and you want a Wayne-style house.
Well,
Grew up in a Wayne-style house.
he bought one and, yeah, lived there.
Build all the Bluebell-style houses.
Yes, ma'am. It sounds like you had maybe a bad salesman. We could have easily helped you with that. I'll give you my card after this.
Is there someone currently living there?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so I went there, well, it looked like it wasn't.
We're currently have the interior permits, and we're beginning, we've demoed and we're beginning to start some alterations from the inside. And then that's why we're before you tonight to discuss the outside. Well, the only reason I have that is because of the addition on the porch.
Okay, so we are back. We are ready to go. This is application 2019-16 for 234 Lenore Ave. Am I saying that right? Small entry addition, 1 story on part of the porch, new windows and cedar siding, gutters, and downspouts. So as you know, we are concerned with the pieces of the project that we will be seeing from the public right away.
So we're before you tonight. Obviously, we're not recreating much at all here. We're just have Vince has purchased this home, and it's a very good home, but it's in need of quite a bit of repair. So in doing so, what we'd like to do for a little bit more space on the first floor is add on the existing porch, add kind of an entry mudroom, if you will, and that frees up the space in the in the front living portion of the home. So what we also found out through the project is there was no insulation in the house itself. It was plaster walls and just hollow walls. So in doing that and trying to be conscious of the insulation values and the kind of ill repair of the existing windows, we want to put new windows in. And they would be the Geldwin sightline windows, which is a clad exterior window in white and a wood window interior. And we would have the simulated divided lights. We're going to keep the existing light cut patterns, which is a 6/6, which is what the original windows are and what the adjoining neighbor's window is, because this is a twin. And then, of course, the neighbor to our right as well. We're going to be putting in a new window, not a replacement window. So therefore, the trim from the outside, existing trim, will be removed. The new window will be put in, and that's basically for so that we get the proper seal and watertight and all that. And then we will mimic the exact window trim, the head, the side jambs, the sill. We'll mimic that exact profile in our mill, and instead of doing it in wood, we will do it in a PVC, just so it's we can maintain it better. We have a cut on the tentatively proposed door, the front door, which is would be a wood door. We have kind of gone back and forth on the style of that. So it will be a wood door with glass light in it, simulated divided light, and a raised panel of some sort. The existing house, interior-wise, had a 5-panel, kind of stacked 5-panel. So we're considering either to do these vertical panels or maintain a kind of horizontal stacked panel. The rear door is we're going to have a little more glass in that one to allow light in, and as you can see, that has that kind of horizontal panel there. So
Just to give you a little bit of a history
sure.
on this house.
Let me put these pictures of the house.
Radnor Historical Society says from their records, it was built 1924 or 1925-ish. The builder was J.D. Lengel. Radnor Township records, this is a contributing property to the historic district. Builder J.D. Lengel. And according to Delaware County property records, it was built in 1926.
This is a picture, obviously, of the front of the home. This is a picture of the side where we're proposing the addition for what would be the new entry in mudroom. And you can actually see that door is the vertical type of panel rather than the horizontal type of panel. this picture is the neighbor to our right as we face the house from the street. And they have done what we're proposing to do, which is that enclose that kind of back section for that entry.
It looked as though the house at the end of the street has an enclosed porch, but not the next-door neighbor.
Well, I'm sorry if the house at the end of the street has what you would consider a true porch enclosure, which kind of was done, I guess, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, where they were kind of these sections that were built in between the columns, and they provided kind of an all-season type living space. That's not what we're proposing. We're proposing just to take a portion of this porch, leaving the front porch alone. So we still have that, but on the side, that will be our, so instead of having an L-shaped porch, we're proposing that we just have kind of a rectangular front porch. And we're taking that back portion of the L and making that part of the interior of the house. I don't know Kathy's last name, but she is 236. So we're 234, she's to the right of us. And she has that similar back portion of the L that is taken up.
Are you going to use shingles?
We are going to remove the existing shingles because they are, in many areas, very decayed and eroded. And we are going to replace them with what one of our vendors is the Maybach line of shingles. And we'll do it in a natural.
A natural instead of a brown? A
Well,
brownish?
it'll weather brown.
Okay.
it's,
So it will be
it's not
dark.
painted, it's a white cedar that patinas.
Okay. Because the other properties like this around there, because on this particular part of the street, the houses were built later. The other houses that are further up the street were built much earlier. But at least that common pattern that I see with the house that you're presenting with today is, the twin dark brown shingles.
Well,
And for the newer houses on that street, which this is one of them, have that. It's very prominent.
which house has what? The house on the street has what? A
Um,
brown shingle?
Well, the house, this is a twin, so the twin on the opposite side of this house has those brown shingles.
Right.
And then also the house, it seems, I believe, at the end of the street,
Yeah,
on your side of the street, which is
they're-
larger,
They're
also has
brown
it too.
because they have weathered brown from dirt, and that's what gives them that. So again, fortunately or unfortunately, there's sections of these homes are next door to us who had to do some renovations, and he had to replace with new shingles. So he has kind of the dark with the light, but eventually that turns. So they when they're new and they arrive, they're a white yellow color, and then they just naturally turn a gray and then a brown. So
Thank you for that. That was very informative.
this is a picture of one of the existing windows. Of course, it was a single pane, had a storm window placed on top of it, and then that is the existing trim and sill detail, and we will just maintain that. We'll have that run in our mill and to the exact proportions and sizes. This is, I purposely took away the aluminum that had been covered up on the fascia and soffit. We want to restore that, remove the aluminum and restore that too. I'm sure there'll be some repairs just from water down. I mean, most people cover that up because they don't want to deal with those repairs. So we're going to uncover it, replace, repair, and take it back. And again, the neighbor 236, Kathy, hers is uncovered and left as its original state, and she has obviously kept up painting with that. So I don't really have a great picture of that, but kind of running up this rake, she doesn't have any aluminum fascia or soffit. And then we would be putting, once we do that, you can see in this picture there what's commonly referred to as a K gutter. We would go back to what the original design was, and again, Kathy's house has that half-round gutter. So that's what we would be, installing in its place. So essentially, we're proposing the addition on the back portion of the porch, but in essence, we're stripping this house and putting it back exactly the way it was, just with, the only difference really is a modern day exterior trim. The cedar is remaining the cedar. That's a natural wood product. There's no, we're not proposing a hardy plank or anything like that. So the only real change is it's the new version of a window, and then the window trim.
Will the color be different?
The color of the shingles?
Yeah.
The color of the shingles, again, when they first go up, are a yellow, because they're a white cedar, which is what this was.
But they'll weather.
But they will weather.
Okay,
to
that's what
that.
that was my key.
They'll first go gray.
That
and
was
then
my
they'll
concern.
go brown, yes.
Not cheap.
No. I actually don't have a sample.
I wasn't sure if you wanted that.
Well, I ordered these in from our supplier, and of course, they were very chintzy in my samples, but,
Well, at some point, they all have to be replaced.
Exactly.
And it's ideal if your next-door neighbor does it at the same time.
I'll certainly offer that to Fran. We can buy building materials fairly cheap, so I will certainly offer that to him.
we asked our siding installer for a price to do the whole front so that the twin would read the same, at least on the front. Now, we have not approached Fran about that yet, but we will do that, and then, of course, obviously, it's up to him whether he would like to do that or not. But we would certainly work with him to do that at a fairly inexpensive.
Any more comments? Anyone? No. I motion to issue a certificate. I motion to recommend a certificate of appropriateness. Do I have a second?
Yes, seconded. All those in favor? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor. So we will
Thank you.
recommend your certificate. Thank you very much, and thanks for
Thank you.
holding out.
Yes, thank you for your patience, and thank you for a very thoughtful renovation of this house. You get it, and we're glad.
It's our business to get it. We certainly don't want to have the wrong reputation.
Do we have any old business at this point?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you again.
Yes, thank you very much.
I second the motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? I think we're all in favor of adjourning this meeting. We are hereby adjourned. The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, October 2nd at 6 o'clock PM. Applications for that meeting must be submitted on or before September 18th of 2019. Good night.